everybody. So I'll begin to make a start, and just to welcome you all here. So it's the meeting of the Public Accountability Board for March, and just to remind you, we are being filmed, and that the recording of that will be uploaded onto the website, so that if for any reason you don't want to be filmed, please note you are being filmed, and you will be available for public scrutiny eventually. So welcome everyone. I won't go through the whole list of who we've got around the table, our virtual table today, but I do welcome in particular Councillor Ruxana Halim, who is the chair of the Police and Crime Panel, and also we've got the chair of the Joint Independent Audit Committee, Steve Ragg. Welcome to you. And then as far as apologies go, Sally, do we have apologies?
I think we've got apologies from Sarah Pullman and Dave Hartley and Jackie Bland. The ones I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see we've got the Chief and the Deputy Chief present with us. Good. Well, we'll crack on with the agenda then, and we've done welcome and apologies. I've mentioned the filming position. Announcements. Do we have any announcements of any sort? I don't have any myself. Chief Constable?
No, none from me, Commissioner. I suppose at this juncture for the last 18 months we've talked to some extent about COVID, but of course in line with the national status we've now stood down our COVID hub and returning very much to business as usual. We've got some very small residual levels of sickness absence in respect to COVID, but completely manageable. I suppose just a point to mention is that we'll be keeping some of the good practice that we've established during COVID, so cleaning of touch point areas of high contact, because we have seen general sickness absence around things like bugs that are contracted easily through that sort of touch point has gone down quite significantly. So we're going to keep some of that good practice. And just a point of reassurance where we've got vulnerable members of the public who are still practicing social distancing, mask wearing, etc., where we've got officers going to those homes, then officers have got PPE available and will wear it at the request of the public, at the member of the public. And we've got officers and members of staff who are still choosing to do that as well, but we're not mandating it organisationally anymore.
Yes, and I was at a neighbourhood watch meeting last night, and I thought I might have seen people, at least some people with masks, but nobody had masks on, so we seem to be getting back to something like normality. Michelle, did your hand go up, or?
Yeah, Commissioner, it was only to refer to your press release in relation to the announcement around PCC review part 2 by the government. The Home Secretary's written ministerial statement on Monday, but you put a press release out in relation to that, looking to strengthen PCC powers and responsibilities in partnerships. Okay.
Do you want to tell me what I said?
You welcomed the extension of responsibilities, but said South Yorkshire were quite far ahead in that you already chair the Local Criminal Justice Board, chair the Violence Reduction Executive Board, and I think you also mentioned the Community Safety Partnerships, but I may have been wrong on that part.
Okay, thank you very much.
That was a test, Commissioner. Thank you.
You can see it like that if you like. Yeah, if you take that view, Michelle, every day is a test, I'm afraid. So okay. Thank you very much. That was announcements. Item 4, public questions. Don't think, Sally, we've got any.
No, Commissioner.
And we've no urgent items, item 5. And item 6, we've got nothing that we need to exclude the press or public from. Item 7, are there any declarations of interest? So item 8 then, and indeed item 9, are both sets of minutes. First of all, then, the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of February. Does anyone have any objection to those or comment on those? Can we take them as a true and correct record? Thank you. And then item 9 are the minutes of the Public Accountability Board held on the 28th of February. Any comments or questions around that, which was a special meeting? If not, Thank you very much. We'll move quickly on then to item 10, matters arising from the minutes. Michelle, is there anything there?
No, I think, Sally, these have both been discharged because I think we've received the suicide prevention briefing from ACC Thorpe. Is that right?
We have, yeah. We've received a detailed response, yeah.
So both can be discharged, Commissioner. Thank you.
Yes, and Dan's response was very detailed, quite long and very detailed, and I think it'd be good to receive it in some, write it into the minutes perhaps, something like that, because it was very good, a very interesting response. So if we can do that, Sally.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much, and then everyone can read it from there. So moving on then to forced performance, and item 11 on our agenda is the Rotherham District Summary Update, and I think, yes, we've got Steve, the District Commander from Rotherham, now visible, as well as in the list in the side bar. Thank you very much, first of all, for the report, which as usual is very informative and very comprehensive. We do thank you for that, and it was a good read, if I can put it that way, and did tell me a great deal. I'm sure all those who read it would have told them a great deal. So we won't. It's quite a long report, so we won't ask you to introduce it in quite that way, but we will ask you some questions, if we may, on particular pages. So if I can begin, I'll begin actually with the first page, Steve, which is page 23 in the document pack, and the first, it's about the fourth paragraph, probably third or fourth paragraph. You talk about there about the increased demand that you faced in the district, Rotherham district. You talk also about reduced resources, largely due, I think, to the coronavirus, and changes to the command team, which have been quite significant, but quite a move round of people. Quite a lot of things there, which I just wonder what the impact of all that has been on your effectiveness as a force in the Rotherham district. What impact has it had?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, Commissioner, and I've got my number 2 with us there as well, Andy Wright, who's the superintendent here at Rotherham, and he'll come in on occasions as I give you some of the answers, if that's okay. Yeah, well, first and foremost, yes, we have had some challenges presented to us, but we saw that, one, as a positive, and two, some of our own making. So as we went over the Christmas period, recognising some of the observations made by the public and from some of our MPs and partners around cannabis cultivation and organised crime that's linked to it, and of course some of the confidence issues that comes from it around power outages, and ultimately people seeing, for want of a better word, properties in some of our lower income areas being used just for that purpose and not allowing people to live in a safe way on occasions. We had to deal with it as a partnership side. So part of the increased demand was around us going out there looking for intelligence and information, working with the partnership to start and deal with some of our selective licensing opportunities that we have, and then looking to close premises down and identify offenders and have them arrested. That ran in parallel, of course, with the fact that we did have, in the lead up to Christmas, the Omicron virus, which ultimately reduced our staffing numbers quite significantly in parts, as well as us going over the Christmas period and seeing some increase in demand around the nighttime economy. But with the refreshed command team, I hope the report shows us as we walk through it that we dealt with that demand, we dealt with that proactivity and managed our resources effectively.
But it's obviously been a difficult period, and I don't know whether you feel you're through it or whether you feel you're still in it.
I think you could split it in a number of parts. So, for example, if we were to speak about the organised crime side of things and Operation Grow, we've really just started with that, and the momentum continues to grow, and with it some of the demand that we'll need to tackle around the partnerships responding to what we find and what we go looking for. In addition to that, we're seeing our increase in police officer numbers coming and our vacancies being filled, but we won't see a true reflection of that uplift until we move towards September time of this year, which is where we'll start and see our officers more on district rather than at university. Again, all of which is a good thing, but just something that we need to manage. And right now, of course, as we move towards the end of the financial year, we're looking to make sure that our officers take their time off, having worked hard over the Christmas period and some peak demands, but also manage daily business, which isn't going to stop.
Yes, of course. Okay. Can I take you then to page 25? And this is under the Protecting Vulnerable People main heading and domestic abuse subheading. It's around domestic abuse. In para 3.14, and you've got a chart above it, you talk about the arrest rate being at 53% for medium risk domestic abuse cases, which seems to be good, because if you compare it with the national average, that's somewhere around about 33%. So this is good. And you talk about the high risk arrest rate at 91%, and I think these are good. I don't know what your own feeling around that is.
Yes, Commissioner, we would support that. It's a real positive arrest rate that we're looking at there. It's been driven centrally from a force perspective, has always been a priority for the force and continues to be a priority for the district. You know, we take it in stages, which is if somebody picks the phone up to our good selves in respect of requiring a service around domestic abuse, it gets prioritised from that first point of call to the point that it comes into the district. And when that allocation comes to district, we ensure, myself, Andy and the command team, that we respond quickly and effectively. And part of that's reflected in our response times. But then the work just begins, really. That's the point that we need to get in there, have a look, secure the evidence, protect the victim, and look to arrest at the earliest opportunity. And I think those graphs give an indication or evidence exactly how well we do that. The next stage, of course, is making sure we put those safeguard measures in around you know, seeking to get people to court if we can't get them to court, making the appropriate out-of-court disposal if it's right, or indeed using the DVP and DVPO route. We spoke at our Force Performance Day very recently. In fact, it was our last one, where it was mentioned by the HMIC that indeed South Yorkshire Police has a significantly lower rate of homicides linked to DA than its peer forces. And that's something that we want to look into and evidence appropriately. So we've done some initial contact with Durham University in order to see how we might look to reflect our homicide rates compared to the proactive activity we take around domestic abuse.
Well, that's interesting, because I know the minister the policing minister is interested in homicide, and particularly homicide connected with domestic abuse. Your final sentence on that para, force-wide analysis of arrest timeliness indicates a stable trend of around 60% of Rotherham arrests made within 1 day of reporting, with most of these within a few hours. That does seem really good. I just wonder, it's a question we've asked before, I think. Can you keep this up? I mean, this must be a big demand on your people.
Yes, we can keep it up. If we think about it, of the you know, the majority of suspects that go through through Shepcote Lane and through the cells, there's probably around 7 out of every 10 are linked to domestic abuse. And for that reason, it's important that we do keep that up. We prioritise it in the way that we've already spoke about, as well as talking about it in our daily management meetings on a morning and our review meetings on an afternoon. So, for example, if you were to say to me, how many outstanding domestic abuse incidents have you got across Rotherham right now? I could tell you that this morning we had 4 incidents linked to domestic abuse, which had to be finalised. And that's the type of laser focus that the force has, as well as the district.
Commissioner, can I perhaps just come in on a full?
Yes, Jim.
I mean, just really to reiterate what Steve says, it is something that we take really seriously. And when you look comprehensively across the board at our performance around domestic abuse, we arrest more people than most forces. We issue more DVPNs and obtain more DVPOs than most forces. Our outcome rate is higher than most forces. But what I wouldn't want you or the public or anyone to get the impression is that this is about chasing figures. It's not. These are all guides. We invested in domestic abuse matters training, and it is every single operational individual in the force, including myself and the Chief Constable, have sat through that training. The focus of that training is very much about the need to separate the victim and the perpetrator of domestic abuse, and to try and make that a period of time in which you can get support services into that relationship to address the needs of the victim and to break that cycle of abuse. Now, the vehicle for doing that could be a DVPM. It could be charge someone, they get convicted and go to prison. It could be to charge someone and you actually undertake that process whilst they're on bail, which prevents them contacting the victim. But that's the real focus of what we do. And all these indicators are just indicators that we're doing that reasonably successfully. But I just wouldn't want it to be thought about it's purely about chasing numbers, because it isn't.
No, and I certainly wouldn't want to. I wasn't trying to suggest that, and I hope it wasn't read like that. On the contrary, I'm simply saying this does seem to me to be good performance that we're seeing here in Rotherham. So thank you for that.
One of the things that we're starting to look at now is, and we just in terms of trying to continuously improve our performances. So when we've got someone on bail, or when we've got someone on a DVPN stroke DVPO, well, just what is the engagement with support services and what's the impact of that in terms of repeat victimisation? And we want to undertake a piece of work to try and track the effectiveness of that and linking in with partners. So I think that's the next iteration of what we'll look at to try and improve our performance further.
Okay, I'll come to DVPOs and DVPNs in a second, but if I can just turn over the page with you to 3.17. I think it is, or perhaps it's 3.18, where you're talking about community resolutions being used in domestic abuse case. That surprised me. I just wonder, what are the circumstances in which you would use community resolution?
Well, first of all, you wouldn't use community resolutions if it was between intimate partners, Commissioner. It's wrote in our force policy that we would never adopt it in those circumstances, but where it's non-intimate partners, for example, father and son, sisters, brothers, that type of relationship where there might have been an argument in the house, could be over something low level, then under those circumstances, we may well use it either through the Youth Offending Service, which will have the appropriate partnership around it if it involves a person under 18 years of age, because as you know, domestic abuse is definition starts with people 16 years and over. And equally, it could be with adults, but what we might want to do is put something in place around, letters of apology, conferencing. We might refer people into an anger management, course. And equally, we've also got the CEASE project that's here in Rotherham, which has been commissioned through RDASH and through the partnership, which ultimately is for people who are under the age of 21 and are having challenges around anger management and relationships. And under those circumstances, if we've got admissions made by the perpetrator and the victim supports it, we would go down that community resolution route. So in Rotherham at the moment, there is just under 3% of our outcomes are linked to community resolution, none of them of which link into intimate partners, past or present.
Okay, thank you very much. On to then DVPOs, DVPNs, which are in the paragraphs just below that, 3.19 and so on. I just wonder whether you could say something about what happens when they're breached and how you're policing the DVPOs, if indeed you are.
Yeah, well, hopefully, Commissioner, what you'll see throughout this report is a significant reference to neighbourhood policing, because the foundation of what we've got as a force and definitely at Rotherham is around building policing up from neighbourhood policing and supporting the neighbourhood function. So with this here, the orders are quite often obtained through our domestic abuse teams or our response teams. But it's quite right and important that our neighbourhood teams know who our repeat offenders are, our repeat vulnerable victims, and they police these orders. So that may be by routine patrols past or actually knocking on the door to make sure the victim survivor is okay, and asking if they can have a look around the house if appropriate, just to see if any offender might be on there subject to an order. So a lot of our breaches come from the neighbourhood policing teams.
Okay, thank you. Page 30, if we can, 3.7.4. This is it's under the heading of Operation Make Safe, and it's about Anti-Social Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014, allowing an officer of at least the rank of an inspector to issue a written notice to the owner, operator or manager of a hotel or similar establishment when the officer reasonably believes the hotel has been or will be used for CSE or related activities. I just wonder to what extent they're being used, those notices, and whether that extends to other establishments apart from the ones named here. Do they apply? What happens to taxi drivers, for example? Are they subject to notices in that way, or could you say a little around that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is specifically linked to hotels, similar establishments, and gaining access to the information that they hold on their residents, either permanent or temporary. You'll be reassured to know, Commissioner, that we haven't given any notices out such as this in the time that we've been running Make Safe, and I've actually been at Rotherham. We've done a lot of work around Make Safe outside of the COVID barriers that you might expect. More recently, we did some work in December of this year. So in the summer, we sent out guidance we have about 14 hotel establishments across Rotherham. And by way of a video, we gave out training materials to these establishments, just reminding people one of their obligations within the establishments to the indicators that they would see around CSE. So, for example, if you had an older male, and it generally is males with a younger child, potentially a young girl who's coming in and wanting to purchase a room, outside of that being confirmed as being a parental relationship, then certain questions need to be asked. And in addition to that, if somebody's wanting to pay for a room by cash rather than by card where it's traceable, that's another question to be asked, along with gifts, etc., abnormal behaviour. So we've put all that out in the summer of this year as a partnership. And then the next stage, of course, was to conduct assurance visits, which was to set up visits with older males going into premises with younger girls, tended to be from our cadets, and using some of our safeguarding teams in order to test their knowledge around the guidance that we'd put out. There was a real positive reaction to what we were wanting to do and the process of doing it by the partnership as well as by the hotels. And the other side of it, of course, was that we would have liked some of the premises to have responded better to some of the signs and symbols that they saw. So that work continues there now with these premises, just to revisit and say, well, is this about new staff? Is this about, you know, widening your training up? Are you using the materials that we've given you, and referencing that back into licensing, etc., through the partnership? So that is a good bit of work which continues.
And you did some work with using police cadets to test out some
That's right.
establishments.
That's right.
And so they turned out all to be, not sure whether you call it negative or positive, but there was no cause for alarm.
No cause for alarm, but still areas for improvement for the hotels. Not all of them, but some of them. So that's where we re-engage with them, and we go back out again just to make sure it just wasn't a one, or to make sure it was just a one-off, and that maybe training needed to go out a little bit more widely than it had done.
Okay, thank you very much. On to, I'm jumping a bit of a way in the report now to page 36. And this takes us back to where you began with Operation Grow and Eastwood. I did go out and myself with one of the media teams who were interested in what was happening here, because there was, as you say, quite a bit of media interest around cannabis farms and the outages that it had caused with the power supplies and so on. The obvious question, I suppose, is where are the landlords in all of this? Because these properties seem to be cheap, rented properties, and there must be landlords, and you must have concerns around some of those landlords. Are we following that up? Do we know who they are? Are they local, and so on?
Commissioner, we can answer all of those questions. As I've said, it's been a real innovative piece of work. Andy leads on our organised crime portfolio, so I'm going to let Andy come in with this, and if there's any bits I want to fill in, then I'll come in at the end of it, if that's okay.
Of course.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Commissioner. So, as you mentioned, it's been a really substantial bit of work that started back in October of last year, and has really been a priority for the partnership of Rotherham, and it is a really good example of true partnership working. We've had embedded members of council staff from housing, from benefits, and from other parts of the council working directly with our teams, giving us that direct access to information, quick time, so we can quickly respond to it. As you said, there's been a lot of activity, so we've executed 77 warrants, which has led to 34 arrests so far, and over almost 9,000 plants that have recovered, with a potential street value of around £8 million. So some significant work. But as you pointed out, that's at the lower end, and the work around Operation Grow is really to start building that intelligence picture up, to looking at those landlords, seeing if we've got landlords that their properties are repeatedly coming up on our radar. Obviously, there will be landlords that are victims as part of this. They won't necessarily know what's going on in their properties, or certainly the kind of activity that's ongoing, and we need to support them. But there will be others who are involved and actually encouraging this. And there's been some really good work around orders and closure orders and prohibition orders to prevent landlords that we're able to evidence are involved in this activity from gaining further income from these properties. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we secured the first couple of those last week.
You're right. We've obtained foreclosure notices, which now close those premises down for 3 months. So as we go in and do the warrants in the first instance, 50 odd of those premises ended up with prohibition notices on until they got certain regulations sorted, health and safety issues, made the houses safe again. But out of those 56, the partnership's been to court, and there's now 4 closure notices that are now in place, and they won't open for 3 months now. You're probably going to go on to the landlords themselves now, Andy?
Happy for you to follow up on that, Steve.
So on your point, Commissioner, in respect of these landlords, so Andy spoke about the ones where lower level might not know. These ones where we're lifting up towards closure notices and 3-month periods, they're not necessarily those people, but similar people in a similar position have been highlighted for further work. So we're now starting to tackle the people who have multiple premises, have had multiple cannabis grows, and now the financial work starts. So we've put that into our organised crime team into Fortify, and now those people, some of them need to get ready, because we're going to start and take their assets from them under the Proceeds of Crime Act. And of course, substantial sentences can come from that too. So as much as it sounds really good what we're doing, we've only just started. And so watch as we go through 2022.
Yeah, no, I get that, and we will return to this. I'm quite sure. Just insofar as you can say at this stage, where landlords don't know, is this because they're absentee, that they're a long way away from Rotherham?
Yeah, well, it can be. Quite often that's the case, because some of the lower income communities that we've got, and some of the properties are quite cheap, as you well know. So some of these are owned back from elsewhere and are dealt with through management companies. But again, in the same way as landlords, we have really good landlords, we have really good management companies. Equally, we have management companies that aren't that good, but we're starting to see them and we're aware of them. So we're tackling this from root to branch, really.
So can the management companies be pursued in the same way that the landlords can be pursued?
Well, there's people who sit behind the management companies, so we'll make those links through information intelligence and financial intelligence as well, and we'll pursue them in the same way if it's appropriate. There is at least 9 people right now out of the full investigation that we're particularly interested in, those higher up individuals, key nominals, which we've spoke about.
Okay, thank you. So watch this space then.
That's it, Commissioner. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we turn to page 38? And this is some of the work that's going on in different parts of the district. And I'm looking at South Malt, sorry, your area, which you call South, at Maltby and then at Dinnington. But Maltby, I've been to a number of meetings now with people in Maltby, including the town council in Maltby. It's around antisocial behaviour mainly rather than crime, though sometimes it's been about crime, but a lot of it about antisocial behaviour and the need for diversionary activity for young people, which is not directly a policing matter. And there is quite a lot of diversionary activity which seems to be going on in Maltby, in Coronation Park, and run by some of it by the community arm of Rotherham United Football Club and so on. But quite often both what the voluntary sector was doing and what the police were doing in Maltby, members of the town council, some of them, not all, but some of the members of the town council seemed unaware of that. And I just wondered if there's something needs to be done about communication between police and councillors in particular in Maltby, and possibly in Dinnington too, where I'm going to in a week or so's time to meet the town council there.
The short answer is I think you're right, Commissioner. There's been a lot of work going in both collectively as a partnership and individually from a council and a police perspective and a third sector perspective. I think we could have communicated those measures or the actions that we've taken a little bit better than we have done. But we've picked that up in the last 3 to 4 weeks as we've seen some of the unrest in Maltby, where, so for example, the town councillors, the parish councillors were raising some concerns. So I had a meeting specifically with them and with the inspector where we went through what we were doing. And of course, you've had briefings around all of this. So we've got POP plans in place, as you've mentioned. We've got Rotherham United who've been heavily involved in early intervention. We've got Operation Stay Safe, which has been in the Maltby area, which is that partnership response and engagement with the young people in Maltby. And of course, we've took a lot of we've done a lot of executive action there. So for example, in those areas that we talk about, we've had mounted patrols, we've had grip patrols in those areas, which is all about visible policing. We've had our DOCO, which is our crime prevention officer, up there making sure the target hardening's been done. We've also had our TSU resources up there, which has meant we've done 5 drugs warrants. We've allocated 7 antisocial behaviour contracts to young people up there. And we've done 6 of those keep safe initiatives, as well as doing 2 Trojan bus operations, which I think you know what they're about, Commissioner. Yes. So there's been a lot of really good work that's happened up there. I just think we could have communicated a little bit better. So the inspector up there is having more regular meetings, giving more regular updates. We're running these updates through the CAPS meetings, which are led by the partnership. And of course, we're giving updates to your good self. I don't think it's the lack of activity. I think it's been, we could have communicated a little bit better.
No, from the briefings I've had, there's been an awful lot of activity. It's just that it didn't seem to have, the local representative didn't seem to know what had been going on their own patch, which is a shame, because if they don't know, then the wider public clearly don't know. So, okay, thanks very much for that. I'm looking now at page 42. So I'm sorry to jump big numbers of pages here, but at top of the page 8.15, and this is talking about the theft of high value vehicles. And I wonder whether there was any preventative messages that we ought to be getting across. This is something that's not just happening in Rotherham, it's happening across the piece. Whether there are preventative measures that we ought to be telling the public about. How do you protect yourself if you've got one of these vehicles? There must be things you can do.
Absolutely. Well, the messages I'm going to talk about of what we put in our CAPS meetings. It's what we put in our neighbourhood leaflets and briefings that go out. And of course, it's what we put in the Advertiser and other local papers when we talk about key issues for communities. And those key messages, of course, are first of all, making sure that we park in appropriate places, not dimly lit places, that around our own houses, of course, that we have the appropriate lighting and security there. For example, CCTV, ring doorbells, etc. When we have our house keys, that we make sure we keep them away from letterboxes or insecure doors where thieves can actually just walk through in order to, take the keys from there and then take the vehicle away. And of course, depending on the type of vehicle, so you spoke briefly about four-wheel drive vehicles, it's about being aware that keyless entry can take place where jammers can be used, and just making sure that your car's locked before you walk away from it, and also putting the appropriate locking mechanisms inside the vehicle, which can be, from the foot pedal up to the steering wheel and similar. And again, same with immobilizer devices, which are either part of the vehicle when manufactured or additional devices that you can have fitted in order to improve the security still further. What we've also done more widely over recent years is, of course, we've had smart water fitted around areas and premises and signage up, which then is part of the nudge theory around moving crime away from areas where we would often see it previously. And that's helped us with our recorded burglary rate, of course, which we know certainly in Rotherham is below the MSV average for districts.
So those steering locks, which we all used to have on our vehicles a long time ago, and we're now stuck somewhere at the back of the garage, we really ought to get them out again and dust them down.
Well, to be honest, Commissioner, I don't think they ever went away. For people such as myself who own some of these old type Land Rovers and Defenders, you would never get rid of those things because they don't have the best security on them. However, they are quite valuable at the moment, hence why we've seen an increase in four-wheel drive thefts nationally, force-wide, and of course at Rotherham. We have a particular operation ongoing where we've designated one detective constable who's pulled together a number of intelligence reports, which resulted in a number of warrants and a significant arrest and day of action just about 3 months ago, where we hit about 6 or 7 premises simultaneously. And that investigation continues. It hasn't gone away. What we're doing now is all the forensic work that was recovered from there, looking at phone work, passive data, and we'll be looking to build up charges for that in due course. It will have had an impact, has had an impact on recorded crime around these type of thefts, albeit they still continue.
Okay, thank you. I once had a car which I dearly hoped somebody would steal. It was so useless, but nobody ever did. But such is life. On page 44, Steve, this is victim satisfaction is the first word of the paragraph, 9.16. And you mentioned in there the victim booklet, which is given to victims of crime. I just wonder whether that is, I mean, how confident are you that all victims of crime do get a booklet, and does it work?
Well, first of all, it does work. We've seen our satisfaction levels increase. If we went back 4 years ago, our satisfaction levels over a 12-month period would average 72%. More recently, we've seen our averages up at 82%, which is nearly a 10% increase in that period of time. And the messages have been quite simple to our officers and staff. Put victims at the front and centre of your investigations, and by doing that, make sure first of all that so the 3 principles of victim care for the force is about making sure that you pass your details on to a victim as soon as possible, that they've got your contact details, they've got the reference number for the crime, and secondly, it's about agreeing when and how you'll be in touch with that victim of crime, and then of course making sure you stick to it. The third element is the victim of crime booklet. Now, the importance of the victim of crime booklet is that under the Victims Code of Practice, it's mandatory that we give people the details that I've just spoke to you about, and the officers write that in the front of that book, or they email it out with the electronic version of the book. Secondly, it walks a victim through an investigation as to what they can expect, depending on whether they've had a burglary, whether they've had vehicle crime, whether it's been an assault. It gives the support agencies around victim support, how to claim for criminal injuries, and of course, heaven forbid, if anybody wanted to make a complaint, how they could do that. but hopefully we give the right service that's not necessary, but nonetheless the contact details are there. And then the last page of that booklet is a bit of open space, because as we know, when somebody's been the victim of crime, they don't readily remember exactly what's happened immediately afterwards. And it's to give our victims and complainants some time just to think about what they might remember, put it in the back of the document, and then of course the next time they speak with the officer or member of staff, make sure that they pass that information on. Now, I'm not saying that we give that out in 100% of occasions, but we give it out a lot more than we did when we started on this journey some years ago. And the booklet is refreshed on quite a regular basis, probably every 1 to 2 years, as the victim's code changes, to make sure that the information we have is up to date and easily accessible.
But it should be given out in 100% of cases. Is that?
Oh, absolutely, it should. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it should.
Page 45. This is under the general heading of resources, 10.1.2, and this is CID PVP, and it's about vacancy rates, and it talks there about the overall vacancy rate of 26 posts, 8.4%, broadly in line with the force. Within this number, we have CID PVP at 14.85%, 15. That just rings a note of alarm. That's all. I just wonder whether we're right to be alarmed about that. What you can do about it.
Well, Commissioner, I'm going to bring Andy in on this, because Andy does a lot and coordinates our resourcing across the district. But as a command team, we have regular conversations about this. So if you said to me, where do those vacancies sit? Very few of them sit in our PVP world, because for obvious reasons, that's where we have our child abuse investigations, and that's where we will always prioritise to make sure that gaps are minimal in those areas. Nonetheless, we need to carry a vacancy rate as we bring our new recruits through. But Andy will give you the reassurance that you need around how we decide on where those vacancies will be, and how we refresh ourselves on a regular basis to make sure we are where we want to be.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve. So as Steve's alluded to, PVP and the CSE's teams have always been our number one priority, and making sure they're fully resourced, not only with the necessary posts being filled, but with the right individuals within those posts, to make sure they're doing an effective job and delivering that top quality service that we expect. We have had some challenges with resourcing in other teams, but we've done a lot of work. It's built into our people plan now, which we meet every fortnight to discuss. So myself and the chief inspectors, along with representatives from our workforce planning team, meet fortnightly, and we discuss any emerging issues around resourcing. And what that's enabled us to do over the last probably month to 6 weeks is really start to rationalise our staffing levels and put people in the right locations. So, for example, our domestic abuse team now is staffed better than it has been at any point during my time in the force, and I would say probably better than it has been for the last 18 months or so. So we've only got one vacancy in there currently, and there are some plans to hopefully fill that in the near future. Likewise, as you'll see on the report at the paragraph that you referenced, our neighbourhood teams, we're just currently going through another interview process to recruit some more officers into our neighbourhood teams. And since this report's been delivered, we've also been able to increase the supervision within our neighbourhood teams, and we're currently just awaiting the results from the latest round of force-wide promotion boards, which again, another one of those vacancies from neighbourhoods has been earmarked to be filled, hopefully via those boards. So that's really given us some sort of a sense of security and a sound understanding of where we are with our resourcing, but making us feel confident that we've got the right people in the right places. Obviously, as Steve has mentioned, we will always have an element of a vacancy gap. I think the other point to mention in relation to the vacancies is we're really starting to see some of the benefits from the rotations of the PEQF students. So these are the officers going through their probation, going through their journey to become substantive officers. And the really unique element that the PEQF brings is it mandates rotations for these student officers. So as previously they might have come in, been tutored and spent their 2 years on a response team. there's now a defined and built-in programme, which means they will spend time in our CID departments, they will spend time in our neighbourhood departments, and they'll spend time in our domestic abuse teams. Not only does that upskill them and leave us with a better, more rounded officer at the end of it, which ultimately will benefit whichever team they finish in, but it gives us that additional boost that you won't see in those vacancy figures, because they are in addition. So currently we do have additional staff in our CID teams, our response teams, our neighbourhood teams, and our domestic abuse teams that won't show up on those figures. So it just gives us that extra bit of resilience. And obviously the enthusiasm of the new students has been great, and all the reports I've had from the inspectors have been overwhelmingly positive about the contribution they're delivering.
Thank you. That's very good to know. And Steve, yes.
Yeah, Commissioner, and just to build on what Andy said, so where you can see that says CID PVP 15 posts, what that means for PVP is actually 5 DC positions and 1 investigating officer. And what we do here is when we make our decisions, we also consult with our DIs as part of the people plan, or our inspectors, and we also give them input as to where they see their threat, harm and risk. So if you were to speak to the PVP DI right now, he's comfortable with exactly where he sits, as we are, with those vacancies, on the backdrop of you recently visited the Evolve team, and you could see the work that was happening there. And what we've done is taken one of our response officers from frontline policing and put them into the Evolve team to improve our resilience around child criminal exploitation, because of the skills that that particular person does. So we team and ladle as to where we need to put people, balancing that risk against the vacancies. So what took a little bit of a hit for that was, of course, the work we used to do around serious acquisitive crime and burglary. Initially 12 months ago took a little bit of a hit to make sure that we had our child abuse, now PVP teams up to strength. We passed that now, and we're actually in a position where we pretty much resourcing everything effectively.
No, you're right. I did visit the Evolve team in Rotherham, and that was a very good visit. We had a good time. Ruxana, we missed you at that, but we had one of your colleagues from Rotherham Council, Councillor Tim Dixon, was there. He was present at it, and we met. Was it Sam Blakemore? Was that the officer that you were referring to?
That's him.
Yes. Well, I think maybe on the call. I don't know whether he wants to reveal himself.
Hello, Commissioner.
Oh, yes,
hello, everybody. Yes, I am here, and it was very nice to meet you last week for the first time when you came to visit us.
No, you seem to have a good operation going there with Rotherham Borough Council, members of staff, and yourselves.
Commissioner, so Sam's joining us for the CSE part of the meeting to hopefully give reassurance to the public and yourself around, I know you've obviously clearly been there recently, but to give some additional reassurance to the wider public around what's happening in Rotherham. So he's here for that purpose, just for your awareness. Yep, absolutely. So we'll come back to you a bit later then.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Well, I've come to the end of the comments I wanted to make, Steve. There was just one other thing I wanted to mention. That is, last Sunday there was a run in Rother Valley Park. It involved people from the South Yorkshire Police Women's Network, 16 women. Most of them were from your domestic abuse team, and there was some from my office, including my chief executive. They were raising money. It was International Women's Day. They were raising money for one of the local charities, Ashiana, and they've raised, there's some photographs of them. They've raised £300 so far. It's still possible to make donations to them, and they're raising that money for Black, Asian, minority and refugee communities in the area. Those are people who have been affected by violence and abuse, to help them take control of their lives and to move to a better and safer future. So many thanks to members of your domestic abuse team who took part in that, Steve. It was a great thing to do.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Yeah, we were really pleased to support that, and I know Stacey and the team were heavily involved in it. And again, we've got a number of events similar to that happening throughout this year, which just involves us, one, doing it for the right causes, but two, getting involved with the communities and working with them for these type of causes. So really pleased to see it, and something that we encourage as a command team.
Okay. Steve, these Rotherham reports come round once a quarter. I know that you're retiring at some point this year. Do we see you again at PAB?
I hope so, Commissioner. I think I'm going to try and squeeze the next one in if I can.
Okay.
I truly hope so. I believe so.
Okay, we'll save any comments that we may have, good, bad, or otherwise, to the next. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you, Andy, as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, that was item 11, the Rotherham District update. We come then to item 12, which is the forced performance against policing crime plan, the treating people fairly priority. And Tim, this is in your name. Again, we won't ask you to go take us through the report, which is a good report, plenty in it. I'll just pick on one or two things to ask questions of you. We spent quite a bit of time on Rotherham, so we may have slightly less time for this particular report. But if I could begin then on page 49, I think it is. 49, yes. I wanted to ask something about, this is 3.11. The forces developed positive action strategy to support the enabling of officers from neighbourhood police teams to work with recruitment to become active ambassadors for positive action. That seems a good initiative, and I just wonder if you could say a brief word around that. I mean, are they realistically being given the time to do this?
Well, so what we've done, you're well aware of the work that Inspector Shakil Ahmed has done in terms of trying to galvanise some of our approach to improving the diversity of the workforce. Clearly, Jack can't do it on his own. He needs a team around him. We've made a huge investment in neighbourhood policing over the last couple of years, and we truly believe that the key to improving our representation is about officers who know their communities most, targeting those areas, those touch points where we can speak to diverse members of the community and encourage people and provide information about what it is to become a police officer in South Yorkshire Police. So we've taken the view that our neighbourhood policing teams are the best vehicle to do that. What we have done, I mean, they have got time to do it, and we've got numerous examples where they've done that over the last couple of months. But I've taken the decision that during the next campaign, we will take I think it's 4 of those neighbourhood officers from across the force, 1 per district. And during the 9 weeks of the next recruitment campaign, it will be their full-time job. So they will be dedicated totally to it. There's a trade-off with that in that the neighbourhood policing teams will effectively be one down in terms of day-to-day operational business. This is important for us. We've discussed it many, many times, and we think it's worth it to intensify our action during the course of that campaign. What I'd stress is that that's not instead of the work that's already gone in neighbourhoods. It's to intensify it during that particular period of recruitment.
Okay, thank you. The top of page 50, 3.13, and you talk there about the positive action team holding familiarisation events, and in that para you talk about the dispelling of myths in those familiar. I just wondered what those myths were that you were.
Well, you know, there's the issue of improving the diversity of the workforce has is an issue that we've been trying to tackle all the 25 years that I've been a police officer, and one of the issues at the heart of it is people don't think that a career in the police is for them. They have an impression that there is a particular type required as a police officer, and what we're really making efforts to do is to really emphasise that the strength of a police service lies in its diversity. It lies in our ability to be able to meet the needs of an increasingly diverse community and to actually understand that community. And it goes to that, absolutely goes to the heart of the model of policing by consent. So all those officers engaged in positive action have been through a day's training led by our People and Development Unit to really understand how do you conduct an event like that? What are the sort of touch points that we need to dispel? And as it says in the report, we've undertaken a number of those events, and they will continue to take place right throughout the course of the next year as we continue to recruit our uplift and beyond as well, because this is, whilst there's a good opportunity throughout uplift to make some inroads into this particular problem, it is not something that will stop at the end of the year and when we've got our uplift, because we will always be continuing to recruit to maintain our police numbers, and it's really important that we continue to improve the diversity of the force so we can better meet the needs of the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Just at the towards the bottom of that page, 3.17, you make mention there, it's the second sentence, of a new combined people strategy. I don't think I'd heard about that before. Is that available? Could we see it?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll arrange for you to get a copy of that, Commissioner.
Brilliant. Thank you. Is it thick? I print these things out.
I think I'll have to advise you on that. I mean, we deal with most things as an electronic document these days, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I'm sure we'll get you a copy.
Okay, thank you very much.
If you prefer a hard copy, we can arrange that.
Thank you very much. Going down a little bit to 3.19, I think it is. The forces have identified a particular issue with police officers, leavers from an Asian or Asian British heritage background, those who are leaving and those who are joining. But basically there's an imbalance here, but you're having more leave than join. I just wondered whether you understood that, why that should be, whether you've been able to get your heads around that at all.
What we do, I mean, the issue is that the numbers are very small. So, you know, we do conduct exit interviews. We do speak to people. The numbers are very small. What I can say is what we've not picked out from the interviews that we've done are any particular trends, any particular push factors. Obviously, some people, and there are a number of officers who have left because they've reached retirement age and have left. We do have some officers who leave relatively early on in service, but we've not, on the basis of the interviews that we've done, picked up any particular trends. But we do monitor that, and as we get more data over a period of time, we may pick up some trends, and there's things that we can do to address that.
Okay, so
what I would suggest is, because we've got relatively small numbers in the organisation to start off with, it is very small numbers that.
No, I appreciate that. It's just slightly worrying that the figures are what they are, but same thing really on 320 at the top of the next page, the exit interview. I assume that's partly where you're getting that's where you're getting the information.
I think we gave you figures, it was either the last pub or the one before, about the number of exit interviews, and
yes, you did.
Extent to which we do. I mean, everyone's offered an exit interview to try and find out. Yeah. Some people join the organisation and after a relatively short period of time decide policing is simply not for them, and that may be because of shift work, because of the nature of the job. The issues that we're interested in pulling out are the culture issues, are the particular push factors about the way that they feel in the organisation. They're the things that we're really interested in. But we've not picked up any ostensible trends around that from the data that we've got.
No. Okay. These are the people that they're not, of course, people who are retiring. This is because we know they get an interview with the Chief Constable, a cup of tea and an arrowroot biscuit, as I recall. But these are people who are leaving for other reasons. Yeah. I just wondered whether there is any mileage here in using, we have on the independent ethics panel at least one person who's quite skilled in HR, Mick Hood, and I just wonder whether there was some advantage in having someone who's not part of the organisation involved in that. But I'll leave that with you. Just something.
I mean, I'm absolutely open to it, Commissioner. I mean, the people who conduct these interviews are people from our HR department, so they're not necessarily, police officers, and they're part of our HR recruitment unit. So whilst they're obviously not independent, they are a little bit removed from that the operational policing within the unit that the person who's leaving may have worked. But I'm absolutely open to that.
Okay. Well, it might be something we discuss. He doesn't know I've said that, by the way, but it may be something that we can explore perhaps. Just going down the page to 3.21, the 1, 2, third sentence down. This will be the central focus of the, this is inclusion culture and the central focus of the free to be at SYP approach. I just wonder what all that was about.
So this again is part of our drive to continue to develop the culture of the force. We want an organisation where everyone feels absolutely free to be who they are, whether that's about race, religion, sexuality. We want people to absolutely feel that South Yorkshire Police is a broad organisation that's open-minded, that everyone's views are valued, that we value difference, and actually visibly people who come from a whole range of diverse backgrounds actually feel valued by the organisation. And this is, we've done lots of work over the years to try and achieve that, and this is the latest iteration of that. We're just really keen that people in the organisation realise that this is, and so often when we're having these conversations about diversity in the organisation, we talk about numbers. This is actually about how people feel within the organisation, and that's the most important part of retention. So that's what that campaign is about.
Okay, thank you. I'm on to page 53 now. This is headed Fair Allocation of Resources. One of the things that I get from the leaders of the district councils is that they'll all say the same, which is that they're not getting their fair share in their district of police resources. Police officer numbers usually is how they express it. And I explained to them there is a resource allocation formula. I just wonder whether the resource allocation formula is the same one that I last saw X years ago, quite a while ago, or whether you've got a new one, whether it's how refined it is, and whether we can see it indeed, how it works.
So we've not changed the resource allocation formula in terms of the overarching numbers that sit within the districts, but certainly in the context of this report and looking forward from here now, we are recruiting significant numbers of police officers into the organisation. We have got to make some really properly thought through and researched decisions about where do we make the investment decisions in the organisation, and how do we make sure that we use this 700 and odd extra officers to ensure that the force has got the capacity and capability to meet the challenges of the next 5 to 10 years. And that's in essence what we've got to do. So we have a new people board now where we look at in detail the demand work as we understand, the demand coming into the organisation. We can look at a whole range of data around population levels, crime levels, but also thinking about, well, what are the challenges ahead? So, we know moving forward that we will have to put more into protecting vulnerable people because that's a growing area of demand for us. We know that, and we'll probably talk about it in the child sexual exploitation paper, or certainly touched on it, the proliferation of internet-based offending that takes place. We know that the proportion of crime that is internet-enabled fraud has increased beyond recognition over the last 10 years. So what we've really got to think about moving forward is how do we allocate our resources to meet those challenges of the future? And that's a real difficult dilemma because we've got to apply professional judgment to that based on what we know about crime trends, what we know about demand coming through the organisation now, and what we can reasonably predict going forward. But that's not necessarily, you've got to balance that with what the public sees the issues. So, we've given a commitment that we'll continue to evolve our neighbourhood resources to better align them with local authority structures. We want to make sure that our response policing function can stand alone and not pull on neighbourhood resources. but we also want to make sure that we've got the capacity and capabilities to deal with the ongoing increases in demand around child protection, around child sexual exploitation, around domestic abuse. We need to invest more into our economic crime model to make sure that we can tackle the fraud now, which more people are a victim of fraud than anything else. So it's a really complex situation, and one that we are, we've got a good infrastructure now to be able to make those decisions based on, what we've outlined in the force management statements, what we get out through all our forward scanning through our demand board, and collectively in the people board, we make some decisions around where the priorities are going to be for the future.
Okay, thank you. Can I take you to page 59 then? And there's reference there on that page, and indeed elsewhere. I'm looking at 3.63, but there are also references on page 61 at 3.70 to Pronto. I just wonder, for the benefit of the lay audience around our virtual table, whether you could say what Pronto is. And there just seems to be one issue after another with it in terms of delays and issues around updating it and so on. Just how big a problem is this, and what's the impact that it's having?
Well, Pronto is our mobile application. So in terms of mobile IT that our officers are equipped with now, every officer is equipped with a laptop computer that has that's 5G enabled and has full access to force systems, which is great if they're sat in someone's house taking a crime report or taking a statement from someone. But Pronto is a mobile application that sits on a Samsung telephone that allows officers to record a crime, record a stop and search, record vulnerable child form, and a variety of other functions using a tablet, a handheld device that they can use, and it operates as a tablet. It's a system that we have had for, it certainly predates my time in the force, so I think we've probably had it for about 7 or 8 years. It's used by many other forces, certainly within the region and up and down the country. It's not perfect. I think that's fair to say, but as with a lot of police IT systems, many of them are not perfect. And there are, from time to time, we have integration problems that crop up between Pronto and our main systems of Connect, which is our records management system, and Smart Contact, which is our command and control and incident recording system. And that can arise from a variety of reasons. One of the challenges you have when you buy commercial off-the-shelf systems as opposed to develop your own systems in-house is that when upgrades come in of different systems, it might cause an issue with one of the others. Now, we work hard to try and mitigate that and plan that. Sometimes that's not as effective as it can be. And certainly in terms of, and I've talked to you recently about our new IS target operating model, that's one of the things that absolutely I expect them to get upstream of to reduce the impact of that. So it's not a perfect system, and I won't sit here and say that it is, but certainly in terms of improving officer productivity outside, it's a key part of our technology stack that allows them to operate away from the police station, because hitherto, and you made, I often call it the elastic band effect, in that officers go out to do a job and had to come back to the police station to do all the recording and admin around it on a desktop computer, and that, I think as we've gone over, years ago where everything was done on paper, they deal with it all out in the field and then just come back at the end of the shift and put paperwork in. This is just the modern iteration of that.
And is I'm looking at page 61, 3.70, where it continues the issues around Pronto. Is this an issue of capacity within SYP about getting these upgrades done?
Oh, it's a combination of things. I think it's more an issue around supplier management, and I think we do need to get through our joint IS departments with Humberside Police. We need to get more effective at managing our IS suppliers, and that's how I'd characterise it.
Okay, thank you. If I take you back to page 60, at the top, 3.66, there's a reference there to the work of Tanya Wright in looking at stop and search and leading a deep dive into the data there. I wonder whether it would be helpful to Tanya if she did this alongside the IEP again. And
absolutely, you know, we're always open to that. I mean, we've had a look at disproportionality on many occasions. The simple fact of the matter is that, you know, we know that the way that stop and search manifests itself on the streets of South Yorkshire is disproportionate in terms of some of our BAME communities. Trying to understand that, and there's a whole complex range of reasons behind that, is something that we're always seeking to do, and to seek new perspectives. So absolutely, we're open to doing that in the most transparent way possible. And if the IEP can help with that, more than welcome.
Thanks very much. Sadly, the chair of the IEP has had to resign, Anne McCaskill, because she's got a health issue and is starting some intensive treatment now that's going to go on for some weeks. But there are leads, portfolio leads within the IEP, so I'll have a word with them. But thank you for that. Right. I think that's everything I wanted to ask about, Tim. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to point to, or your.
I don't think so. I think the report stands on its own. It's a comprehensive report. I think we've highlighted the issues that I would want to bring out.
Thank you. I'm always aware that the reports are longer, and we never do full justice to them, but we simply don't have the time to do that. So grateful for that, and all those who contributed to it. Thank you. Moving on then to item 13, which is the CSE update, and we've got certainly got Sarah there, because I can see her now, and Sam we spoke to a minute or two ago. Sarah, if I do what I've done with the other reports and just pick out one or two things.
Of course.
But first of all, thank you for the report. I thought it was quite a frank report, actually, and did say, yes, there are some gaps and there are some things that do cause us concern, and we do need to deal with them. So that's always helpful when it's not simply saying everything's wonderful, Commissioner, and thank you very much.
And I think it's worthy of note, you know, there's been some real learning over the last few months for us around transparency with the Times publications over the Christmas period, which I know you're cited on, and actually our decision to be bolder and not be reactive and act retrospectively, but to actually publish information about CSE now proactively. So for example, the problem profiles that were subject to FOI, we are now publicly putting them out on our website. We have done for 2019, 2020, and when the 2021-22 one is completed in the summer, we'll do exactly the same for that exact reason, so we can show to the public that our level of interest, our level of prioritisation around CSE has never waned and never will. But there are, as with any crime type, there are emerging issues, evolving issues. We'll talk about the online element, I'm sure, which should prove challenging for forces, and therefore we shouldn't hide from that. That is a fact for life, but one that we're working on. Yeah,
no, I totally agree with that. Thank you. And we've already referenced the fact that I visited the Evolve team. Absolutely. And that was a good visit, and I thank them for that. If I can take you to page 6, 3.16, you talk there about a dedicated internet sex offender team, and I think that the public is very interested in this, the way CSE has so often moved onto the internet and what are SYP doing about it. I just wonder if you could say something about that, and whether you think you've got the resources, whether you've got enough to deal with the demand, the growing demand, I guess, in this area.
Yes, so there's a history. We've had an internet sex offenders team for some time to deal with the online prevalence around indecent images, prevalence of file sharing between perpetrators, which deals with child paedophilia and child images. So we've had that team in existence for quite some time now, but the force recognised the challenges, recognised the emerging escalation in terms of volume and numbers, as COP, so the NCA's child exploitation team, they continue to provide information about people they believe to be involved in this type of criminality. And with the advent and the change in technology over recent years, clearly that is increasing in volume. So as I said, the force preempted and foresaw that and made a decision to invest as one of the very early elements of our expansion plan when we knew that we were getting additional officers through not only the national uplift programme but also the local uplift programme that has been put in place for the last few years. So a decision was made to create more posts within the internet sex offenders team. So we now have a position where we have 2 sergeants, an office manager, 12 detective constables, 4 investigating officers, so civilians, a further 2 victim identification spots, and 4 research officers. And we do have a vacancy factor within that team. I'm not gonna lie about that, but it's only a few, so 2 or 3 detectives short currently, and that's primarily due to us servicing the region. So our regional organised crime unit. So some staff have moved on, as they always will, and we encourage them to do so because that brings fresh perspective and also provides them with some development and career aspirations. So the vacancy factor remains low. The investment has been heavy in ISOT. The challenge for the force moving forward is keeping a pace with the technological changes, the volume of offending that falls into this category. But I'm confident that we've heavily invested in our ISOT team. As I said, the vacancy factor is not large, and you saw Steve's work around his PVP team earlier, and the real commitment by SYP right across districts, but also into our more specialist departments to ensure that those areas that are focused on protecting vulnerable people are falling short. That we do have the people in them to provide the service. So. But I think the challenge is there, and we need to keep our eyes open to what will happen in the next 5 years and beyond, and keep it under constant review around what is needed in these areas of hidden harm. I mean, we've gone through 2 years of the pandemic where hidden harm has been allowed purely because of children not being seen. But online is always going to be hidden, and the very nature of this is hidden, and therefore we need to continue to invest in this area of business, work and use all of our capabilities. And there is reference to our ongoing work with the regional Op Reveal team, so that we use all available tactics available to us to identify these individuals and prosecute them.
And I wonder if you could say something around it. This comes up in the next paragraph, I think, about those offenders, because clearly when you're on the internet, you could be anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Do we have any sense of how much of this is within South Yorkshire and how many of these offenders are actually somewhere else in the world?
Unfortunately, I don't have the data, and it would be very difficult without looking at every single individual case and then identifying where the IP address has come back to give a definitive. So I don't have the data, but an anecdote would be that there is a fair proportion of international offending going on in this area. So absolutely, and that causes problems thereafter. And we talked about ethnicity, the recording of ethnicity. Well, in some cases we may never identify an offender, and obviously technology and the ability for offenders to conceal their tracks is ever advancing. So that's why that's really important, that continued investment not only in staff but actually technology, so that we keep up with what the tactics that the criminals are using. Sure,
thank you. I'm on to page 7 now, and this is 3.22. This is about intelligence, where you get your information from, so on. Third-party reporting. I wonder if you could say something about CSE. I wonder if you could say something around that, how successful it is. Does it work well?
So we've been trying to, and we've had third-party reporting forms in place for quite some time, but I think we need to, as a force, continue to emphasise that at partnership meetings. I think people don't think naturally to it when they get information, and we've seen that recently in Rotherham and other places around the force, where information is passed to neighbourhood teams, and that's not a problem. They will deal with it. But I think we probably need to do a bit more work advertising, publishing the availability of this reporting form so that people are confident in the use of it. It is used, but I think there is probably a real potential for greater use of it.
Yeah. And then over the page on page 8, 3.25, towards the top of the page there, you talk about organised crime gangs, and you say that there are no mapped organised crime gangs with a primary offending of CSE, which, yes, I understand that, I get that. I just wonder, though, whether there are children who are drawn into the orbit of organised crime gangs, and who you come across in that context, who actually are the victims of CSE, how alert we are to that. So they may be offenders, and that may be what, or on the cusp of it, that may be what brings them to your attention. They're involved with a criminal gang, even if it's only peripherally. Whether we're thinking CSE when we're doing that.
I think the awareness around this, and it's the wider exploitation piece, isn't it? So it's actually being really aware and open-minded to actually exploitation comes in different forms, whether it be sexual, whether it be criminal or other. We need to be really cognizant of that and not be fixated on one particular element of exploitation, because most of that will be hidden from us, and the young person won't be telling us what's happening to them straight away because of the fact that they are part of that gang. But I am confident. If I think back, I believe, Commissioner, you went to you were there at the Epic launch in Doncaster, where we did the VR, the virtual reality exercise, and you could see there that actually there was a real interchange between sexual offending, CSE, and CCE. So young people in the county lines environment, but often young women, but it doesn't have to be young women, brought into that area, exploited, maybe not initially sexually, but as they build the relationships, it becomes sexual exploitation. And so I think absolutely there's recognition of the interchangeable nature of exploitation within OCGs, and that we are trying to raise awareness, continue to raise awareness of that, not only through the EPIC programme that we were both party to, but also through some of the training that we're developing through Op Hydrant around raising awareness, and not saying if it's this, it must be CSE. Actually keeping a really open mind, awareness of what are the signs of exploitation, because it comes in very different forms.
Absolutely.
And it's
yes,
interesting, you're right, we don't have an OCG mapped with the primary offending, but we do, as it's noted here, have individuals, principal members of OCGs that are shown to be having a risk marker of CSE. So we're cited, and that causes further taskings around further intelligence development to understand that a little bit better, to then formulate that. But I think we need to understand that it's difficult. Very, very rarely will you have, most OCGs are operating in lots of different fields. So a lot of our OCGs are drug related. And we know that with drug trafficking often comes county lines, and often with county lines comes CCE, CSE. And therefore they are, and that's why that's really important to acknowledge those interdependencies between all of these different issues. And clearly Alexis J in the ICSA report from a few weeks ago referenced the OCGs, and many forces are in similar positions, and it's something we just need to ensure, as we are here in South Yorkshire, that it's on our strategic intelligence assessment, it's on our intelligence requirement, that we're regularly putting that out to our neighbourhoods, to our officers on the front line, to build that intelligence picture, so we have a true picture around what those OCGs are doing and how we then tackle and disrupt them.
Yeah, thank you. On page 10, this is 3.3, well, it's probably 3.36, child abduction warning notices, porn. I wonder if you could just say, well, again, for the lay audience, what they are, and what happens if they're breached? Do you proactively do anything about this, or, well, you tell me.
So yeah, child abduction, it's a wordy thing, isn't it? So they are intended for where there is no obvious offending, but we are concerned about inappropriate relationships between children and adults. We are able to serve these child abduction warning notices, which is that if you're found in the company of this child, again, you are liable to arrest and potential prosecution. And so it's just giving them the heads up that if you do this again, that's the consequences of it. And there are different thresholds depending on the status of the child. So for example, looked after children, it's extended to 18, but for other children, it finishes at 16. So there are some complexities within the framework. But we have seen an increase in the use of child abuse abduction notices over recent years, with a peak in last year, which we're looking like we're going to emulate this year. So we're going to deliver the same number of calls as we have in the last year, which I think is a really positive sign that they're being used proactively. And as you said, it's key that we then look at it thereafter. We don't just serve the notice and then forget about it. But actually, these are the children that we've detailed later on in the report. Some of these children are the ones that are featuring they're at high risk of exploitation. So there is absolutely proactive efforts to disrupt people that are seeking to exploit them. So through the focus on the child, we often become aware of other individuals. And then there's that proactive ability to use the notice or enforce the notice. And if they are found, they are arrested for child abduction.
Yeah, okay, thank you. On page 12, towards the bottom, mention there of the vulnerability awareness campaign, which is going to happen, led by your media team, SYP media team. I think we'd be very glad to help with that if there's any way we can, if our media lot can join with your media lot.
I'm sure that would be very welcome. So quite a bit of work is already ongoing around this, and it's the one you're very aware, vulnerability awareness. It's actually an exploitation campaign. So again, in line with what I've just said around the need to understand those interdependencies between different elements of exploitation, we're launching a campaign that encourages that, not only externally but internally. So it's a piece that looks right across county lines, CSE, CCE. We've done a lot of research already on this, and there's two key areas of focus, which is going to be dispel the myths as to who can become a victim of exploitation. I think historically, when we look at CSE, but also CCE, we focus on looked after children, and vulnerable children by their very nature of their unfortunate childhood and their experiences thus far. When actually that's not always the case, and we need to keep our eyes open. Clearly those children are particularly vulnerable, but that doesn't mean that others aren't. And then the second point is to build trust and confidence in our response. And this is the feedback we're getting from our partners. So we've taken that on board. And the plan is for the wider exploitation awareness campaign to launch in May. But I'll ensure that Carrie links in with your team, Commissioner, to ensure that we've got we're learning from all those different avenues and all the groups that you speak to inform that piece as we move forward. Yeah,
I'm sure it all helps. So thank you. Finally, from me on page 13, where you mentioned challenges, and I welcome the fact that you have been, as I say, open and frank about this. 3.52, the very first para there. Barnsley and Doncaster District currently have no dedicated CSE or child exploitation team other than a single district SPOC. That did just make me set up a little bit. I don't know whether you want to offer me some reassurance around that.
So yes, there is a discrepancy right now, which we're determined to fix. So I guess that's the reassurance. This was introduced in 2018 under the crime review, so that's the position we've been in, where when we say there is no dedicated CSE team, but we have had a dedicated person that is engaging, working alongside social workers and other representatives of Barnardo's and other charitable sector within our local areas, and making sure, and it talks about limiting the capacity. Of course it does. However, we do have 4 to 5 teams in each of those areas as well, which have been, by through the district governance structures, through their weekly or bi-weekly intelligence tasking meetings, they're able to share the information and make sure that they've got a proactive capability around this. So it's not saying there isn't any, it's just it's not dedicated under the umbrella of CE, so child exploitation. But we recognise that is a gap for us as a force, and that's why the PVP review, which I'm overseeing and being led by Pete Thorpe, our new detective superintendent in PVP, is focusing one of the first key priority. Well, there are 3 key priorities. One of those 3 is around the ensuring we have the resources to deal with CE, so child exploitation, right across the force. So that will be reporting back to me in the next month or so, with a view to implementation over coming months. So we will see, hopefully in the next few months, and it will take some time to implement. I'm not going to lie about that. So we've seen the challenges that Steve's articulated earlier around detectives, and we know that's in line with the national detective shortage. And we know that often, and most of the time in the CSE world, we do need detectives. So we need to understand what we need, which is what the PVP review will tell us. And then we need to understand, how do we implement that over what timescale to ensure that we're providing that service to victims, which is already being serviced. It's just an enhanced service. We need to ensure that we are providing that enhanced service to victims.
Okay, I was going to ask you actually about the PVP review, but I think you've covered that. I was wondering whether the PVP review was like the painting of the Forth Bridge. It kind of never came to an end, but
No.
Yes, it does come to an end, and
It does come to an end, although it's a bit like the ISOP team, the Internet Sex Offenders team that we were talking about before. We have, over the last 5 years, we have seen, or 5-10 years, we're seeing constant change and evolution in these areas for policing. And COVID presented further challenges, which all forces have recognised and are trying to tackle. So it's an ever-evolving picture around protecting vulnerable people, which ISOT falls into. So again, we need to be really alive to that and not make assumptions around what the future poses for us, but actually use the evidence base that we put in our FMS around forecast demand, really, and try to understand that as best we can, so that we don't have to go through a cycle of conducting these reviews every 3 to 4 years. That actually we use our intelligence, we use the evidence base now to predict, ensure that with the resourcing we're putting in place is future-proof to a certain extent, because it can never be entirely so, but we make sure that we're doing that. And that's what this PVP review, within tight timescales, is delivering for us. I've just received the latest timeline for the PVP review, so by the summer months we will have a plan.
Okay, thank you very much. At the beginning of the meeting, or earlier on, I made reference to my visit to the Evolve team in Rotherham, and we briefly met Sam Blakemore, who I think is probably still on the line. Sam, I don't know whether you want to say anything briefly about what you do in Evolve, because I think that'd be of general interest to people.
Yes, Commissioner. Well, as ACC Pullman mentioned a moment ago, I've been invited along today to give a really short presentation on just some of the things that are happening in Rotherham. So I will do that now. She told me very strictly I have 10 minutes, 15 at a push. So
that might change some, depending on what the Commissioner's got available. But I think it's really important. I think it's really important for people to hear the passion and compassion with which we deal with victims of CSE, and this is a prime example.
So I've just got a short presentation. Let me bring that up on screen now. So let me introduce myself first of all to anybody who doesn't know me. My name's Sam Blakemore. I'm the Detective Inspector for Rotherham PVP, and I've been in post about a year here in Rotherham after spending the last sort of 10 years or so of my career working in PVP in Sheffield. So I just wanted to very briefly talk you through, and I will apologise before I start because I could really talk about this all day. So I've tried to make this a whistle-stop tour of some of the things we're doing and the approach we're trying to take here in Rotherham, and the sort of ethos behind how I want my staff to work. But like I say, I will apologise if I do skirt over some of the detail just because of the timescales we have. So I just wanted to start with with a quick slide about why I think this is so important. You know, I think it's a pretty obvious statement that I put at the top there, that protection of the most vulnerable in society should always be our #1 priority. And you know, I think that should be, it's easy for us to forget sometimes in the police why we're actually doing what we're doing. And I sort of try to make that the heart of all of, you know, the basis behind all the decisions I make. And actually it's what I expect my staff to say, expect is what I demand from my staff as well, that is the overriding principle behind everything we're doing. And you know, our aim is to do everything in our power, using whatever legal powers we've got and whatever resources we've got to try and do that. And because of the impact, and I've put there short and long-term impact on victims of this type of crime, you know, I think there's empirical evidence about victims of exploitation being so much more likely to have mental health problems in later life, to experience poverty, to experience substance misuse problems, and actually to be at far greater risk of being victims of further criminality, different types of crimes, but further sexual offences. And the point I want to make about why that's so important is not only because of such a huge impact, but the sort of broader societal impact of that, the trickle down effects of the impact on those people's lives, but then the impacts maybe on the lives of their children and going forward, and what we can do to intervene earlier and try and break that cycle and prevent some of those things from happening. So that's why it's so important in my mind. I mentioned there about the police and crime plan, and subsequently SYP's mission, and you know, the first thing in the police and crime plan is protecting vulnerable people. Also just mentioned there about, it's, you know, a government priority now, the Tackling Child Sexual Abuse Strategy, which is the first of its kind, published in 2021, outlining an actual national strategy for how we can tackle and prevent sexual abuse. So that's just, I just wanted to say that before I tell you about some of the things we're doing. In my mind, I break it down into 3 pillars. And I've put the multi-agency response there, and it's probably really important for me to say that I reference partners quite a lot in what I'm about to say, and whoever I speak to, because it really is a multi-agency response. It has to be a multi-agency response to this if we're going to achieve the things we need to achieve. And what I would say about Rotherham is, one of the things I'm most proud about working in Rotherham actually is the strength of the partnership arrangements and the relationships that we have here, and how I think that makes us so much more effective. So I broadly break it down into sort of 3 areas in my mind. The first part is education and prevention. So what do we do to stop people becoming victims, but actually also to stop people becoming perpetrators of these types of crimes as well? What can we do in schools at an early age? Education and awareness. I've listed a few things there. I'll pick up on online safety. We were talking about the prevalence of online offending before. Substance misuse awareness, family and parental awareness about spotting the signs. And awareness and education around relationships and appropriate sexualized behavior. I think that's a key part of the strategy that we have to have, because, and you know, I'll be careful about where I say this, Rose, but I think by the time we get to the point where we're having to investigate crimes, then part of the system is already not doing what it should have been doing. You know, and I think there needs to be as much focus on prevention as there is our response afterwards. Moving on then to talking about intervention and support. So actually, when we get to the stage where we are able to identify, and the key to this is early identification of people that are either vulnerable to exploitation or we believe are already being exploited in some way, have already become victims. So early intervention and early identification, I beg your pardon, and targeted intervention around that. So things like work about the grooming cycle and drug and alcohol services, sexual health services, some of the commission services we have in Rotherham. So we use Bernardo's here. They do a lot of work around family and parental support as well. And I'll come on just to talk briefly about the Evolve team, so children's social care response, and how we work jointly so well with them. And then finally, this bit that you might think is probably more related to the police is disruption, pursuit and prosecution of offenders. I'll talk in a moment about a process called CETG, but that's sort of the other focus for me is how we go about doing that as effectively as possible, how we gather and use intelligence, how we sort of analyse and profile the problems we've got so we can target our resources at them, you know, and the focus on investigation and pursuit of offenders, and doing that early as well, you know, rapid identification and positive action of offenders, what opportunities we have for evidence-led prosecutions, because the reality is, in the vast majority of child exploitation cases, whether you term it sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation, we haven't got people that are coming saying to the police, this is what's happened to me and these are the people that did it, like you might have in say, other types of crime. The reality is we have young people who do not perceive themselves to be a victim of crime at that point, and that that makes those investigations so much more challenging, and how we have to think about other ways to address that. And again, I am sorry that I'm sort of flying through this, but something that's been discussed recently, talking about how we develop our approach towards victims and some key principles that we're looking to how we work towards, to try and, you know, place the victims at the heart of everything we're doing. So I'll go through these very quickly. You can see them there on screen. So the key one, safety, how we keep people safe and support them so they actually feel safe as well as that. Trust and transparency. ACC Pullman's talked about that. You know, some of the work we're doing around, you know, acknowledging our shortcomings sometimes and acknowledging the errors of the past. How that is how we're going to build trust with people in the future, I think. Peer support, collaboration. I've just talked about multi-agency working and the importance of that in my mind, how huge that is. Empowerment, so how we're allowing victims or survivors to recover and move on with their life. And then humility and responsiveness, so thinking about how we are treating people and looking at, you know, as I mentioned a moment ago, acknowledging our shortcomings and looking at how we can improve on them in the future. So that, in my mind, some of the principles that we're trying to shape our overall response around. I'm just going to quickly move on and just tell you about the staffing we have here in Rotherham. So we have, we're co-located in terms of our child exploitation staff. So you'll see there we've got detective inspectors, so that's me. We've got 1 sergeant, 5 detective constables, 2 civilian investigating officers, and 1 criminal exploitation SPOC, which Mr. Chapman actually referenced earlier on when he was talking generally about Rotherham. They're co-located at the Eric Manns building in Rotherham with the Children's Services Evolve exploitation team, and you'll see there's some really good staffing in there. They've got a service manager, a team manager, an advanced practitioner, 4 social workers, 2 family support workers, 2 missing advocates that are really key. I'll come on to talk about missing episodes in a moment, a criminal exploitation worker, an exploitation nurse. And I mentioned commission services with Bernardo, so there's 4 Bernardo staff that are located as part of that team, and we've actually got 8 youth offending service staff there as well. They all work in the same building, and Commissioner, you came and visited us there last week and spoke to a few of the people there. That works fabulously well, I think. There are really great relationships between all the different agencies and different staff that are in that team, and they communicate very effectively and rapidly, and you know, I think the benefits of co-location are felt really, really keenly in that team particularly. I know we're short of time, so I will just move on very quickly just to talk about a few of the processes we've got in Rotherham. So I'm just going to mention and reference here the Rotherham strategy to tackle and prevent child exploitation. So that there's a strategy that the partnership have produced. Why I've brought that up on screen is I just wanted to show you that there's something in there that jumps out at me, and that's the importance placed on the voice of victims and survivors, and how that actually permeates every part of the process of governance, about how we work with partners and how we implement the strategy that's been designed. So the processes, the 3 main processes I think that are most important to mention in Rotherham. So the first one, the what's called the Child Exploitation Delivery Group. So it's a multi-agency process, which is at senior management level, and where strategic decisions are taken. It's quarterly. You'll see there's representation from a whole host of different areas, primarily the police, children's social care, and the clinical commissioning group, but there's also a wide-ranging membership to that. And what I like about that meeting, it's chaired by Mr. Chapman, and I'm going to summarise it like this: it's the right people in the room at the same time who are able to make decisions. And I think that's very effective in setting the overall strategy, but also holding each other to account about what our role in this is and what our performance is. Just moving on there to sitting below those, a couple of key processes. The first one, Child Exploitation Tactical Group, which is a weekly intelligence-led meeting. We referenced earlier the partnership referral form and the importance of how we gather as much information as we possibly can, and then how we process that information and then act on it. So ultimately in that meeting, that's chaired by me, we review all new intelligence submissions, try and understand the concerns, to map them and try and put in place plans and actions to try and mitigate or eliminate that risk. Again, you'll see there's really excellent representation that comes to that meeting. A lot of people are contributing very well to information, you know, researching the information we've got, and then actually I'll come on to my next slide about some of the work that the actions that we task out of that meeting. One thing I just wanted to pick up on, you mentioned about taxi licensing earlier. So we have licensing at that representation there, play a key part in that. So if we have some concern around a taxi or a licensed premises, we've got somebody there who can feed in information about that situation and potentially trigger some action. So it's just one example of the benefits of that meeting, having the right people there. Another thing we do at that meeting is we review all missing episodes that have occurred with children that week to see if there's an exploitation concern or element to them, and making sure that things are in place to do that. You saw them on a previous slides, the 2 missing advocates that we have that work at the Evolve team that do return interviews and try and engage with every child that's been subject to a missing episode. Another thing we push through that meeting are child exploitation, I beg your pardon, CORN, so child abduction warning notices that we've just had a lengthy conversation about. We try and push those extensive, the tasking of those through that meeting, and the reviewing of their effectiveness and the ongoing policing of them, I guess is the way to put it. That actually meeting feeds into something called the MACE process, so multi-agency child exploitation meeting, which is a weekly meeting which is more focused around the individual children that have been highlighted to be at risk of exploitation. So that's where risk assessment and safety planning takes place. You'll see there from my slide that again there's really good attendance at that meeting. They use something called the Vulnerability Assessment Tracker tool, which is a nationally accredited tool to try and give us a structured risk assessment and try and actually identify the level of risk, but also then put in plans to mitigate that. And it's something that it's trying to identify actions that are over and above the child's statutory plan. So this doesn't affect things like strategy meetings that take place as normally in the MASH when there's concern. We believe a child's at risk of significant harm. It doesn't impact on things like child protection conferences and other things that are taking place. This is additional to that, where you've got people around the table that are specialists in exploitation that can actually think about other interventions. And the reason I just wanted to pick up on there is there was a lengthy discussion there about the sort of crossover and the interdependencies of sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. What I like about that meeting is it's about child exploitation full stop. And the professionals there sort of very much understand the interdependencies and the crossover, and I think that's really important. Again, I'm probably taking up far too much time, so I'm going to move on very, very quickly. There's a slide here, and I'll just pick out a few key things out of it. Some of the things that the actions and the work that we task out of the criminal exploitation tasking group. What I wanted to highlight was some of the sort of disruption activity that takes place, and particularly on a partnership level. So not just things that the police do, attrition visits and disruption activity around specific locations, things like patrol plans or problem-orientated policing plans that come out of that when we identify a problem in a particular area, but the action tasking to other agencies. So that potentially around sort of engagement or safeguarding. So we have Youth Offending Services, Bernardo's, the Evolve team there. So quite often we'll task work to them, and I've put a phrase there about professional overload. What I like about that meeting is we decide who the most appropriate person to engage with that young person or that situation might be, rather than lots of people trying to have a bite of the cherry, if you like. That can probably be quite overwhelming, I would say, to a child. So that sort of communication and coordination is key for me. And then action tasking to other agencies. I mentioned their licensing, fire service, environmental health and antisocial behaviour teams. So I do lots of tasking around locations of premises, for example, and try and bring those agencies in to see what they can bring to that. And very quickly, I'll just mention Operation Make Safe. I know we've had a lengthy conversation around that, so I won't go into any more detail, just that we consider that at this meeting, and Mr. Chapman's described the ongoing work around that and the plans moving forward. And very, very quickly, I'm going to finish on something where I started to take this back to talking about how we understand the needs and feelings of our victims and how we can better tailor our service around that. One of the key recommendations in the Op-Linden report, so that was the IOPC report into some of the things that happened in Rotherham previously, was about voice of the victim and how the police can do more to engage and understand with victims and survivors. So we've got a really good project here in Rotherham where we're actually using an organisation called Remedy to try and engage with previous victims and survivors that we've identified. We're using a data set from 2020 to try and engage with those people and try and learn more about their experience as a victim, not just in how their interactions with the police, but services in general. You know, try and gather information about how they felt they were treated by professionals and better understand how our actions and interventions were perceived by them, to try and inform how we respond in the future, to try and learn about actually what we're doing and could we do things differently, could we do things more effectively, how did we make that person feel, and what could we have done that would have might make them feel better able to engage or better supported or protected. So I know I've probably gone over my 10 or 15 minutes there, and I'll apologise if that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour and I've thrown lots of information at you there very quickly without lots of detail. I'll just round off by saying, as ACC Pullman was saying a moment ago, there are lots of areas for improvement, but actually there are some really great things happening in Rotherham, and there are some hugely dedicated and hardworking staff who really care about what they're doing. And you know, that there's sometimes a disconnect between the public perception and certainly the media narrative about South Yorkshire Police and particularly Rotherham's response to CSE. But actually, we're doing some really good things, and we're over and above some other areas of the country in our response and some of the processes and procedures we've got. And I want to think about how we change the narrative, because it isn't good for the children of Rotherham, it isn't good for the town of Rotherham, and it isn't reflecting accurately what the current situation is. So I'm sorry if I've rambled on a little bit there. I'll just wrap it up there and see if there's any questions.
No, don't apologise at all, Sam, and thank you very much indeed for that. And there's a thank you in the sidebar from Ruxana, the chair of our police and crime panel, who, as I say, is a local councillor in Rotherham, so that's very good. And I do thank you for making me welcome when I visited you. And what struck me about it was not only what Sarah said at the beginning, the passion and the compassion that you all had, but also when I was talking to people, I simply didn't know who was a police officer and who worked for Rotherham Borough Council. And I thought that was a huge plus, actually. You're a very integrated team and you work as colleagues very well together, and that really came across. So
I'm glad that came across, because it really is the case, and it is one of our key strengths, I think.
Thank you. I don't know whether Sarah or I see the chief has appeared, whether you wanted to say anything or you're happy to leave it at that.
I'm happy to leave it at that, Commissioner. I think Sam really spoke well about all the brilliant work that's going on at Rotherham. He's an excellent advocate for what we're doing around CSE. And I think, just as an aside, you know, actually having practitioners coming and talking in this forum about some of the good work that we're doing, I think that's probably going to be more impactful for you than simply hearing myself and other members of the command team sort of relaying some quite dry reports to you. So I think Sam did a brilliant job today, really brought it to life, and I hope has left everybody with a sense of his enthusiasm and passion for this area of work.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much, Sam, and perhaps you could convey our thanks back to your team as well for all that they're doing and for the way in which they explained the work to me when I came on the visit. Thank you very
Absolutely,
much.
Commissioner, I will do. I'm sure they'll be very grateful. And just Councillor Halim, yes, of course, I can share the presentation.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Shall we move then to we're on to Chief Executive reporting, item 14, PCC decisions. Don't think that need detainers, Michelle, need it?
No, there's 3 decisions, Commissioner, on page 66 since the last meeting on the 7th of February. Capital investment to improve technology at headquarters for meetings, OHU's services, that's occupational health for well-being of officers, and force control room staffing investment in the revenue budget to improve the staffing to meet demand. I'll quickly move on to the work programme, Commissioner, so we can round up quickly. And we've got the 3-month work programme there. The focus next time in April is the Barnsley District Report, and the force report focuses on your priority of tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. For force colleagues, what's missing from the April work programme there is the outturn for performance that's required. I've already discussed that with Tim, so he'll be expecting it, Alan, but we just need to reflect that on the work programme. And then delivery plans to match your new police and crime plan will come to your May PAB. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. And the police and crime plan, we should have some physical copies available for the next time we meet, and we'll get those out to members of this group and to the councillors and other interested parties. So thank you. Is there any other business?
No, Commissioner. Next meeting 11th of April.
Okay, so can I thank everyone for your attendance today, and I look forward to seeing you on the 11th of April. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.